familiar with your outstanding and creative contribution to the field of socio-emotional development in general and attachment theory and research in particular. Her well-known Baltimore study is in fact, to my mind, the first cross-cultural study on attachment because a real first effort to classify infant parent attachment security organization was made more than 2 decades ago in her home study in Uganda. This is important to note, especially in an international meeting such as ISSBD. The International Society for the Study of Behavioural Development emphasizes, among other things, 2 major dimensions which are germane to developmental psychology: internationality and lifespan perspectives. Thus, in this regard, what could be more appropriate than having a conversation hour with a scholar who has inspired so much of the work and activity in these 2 important dimensions in developmental psychology. It is also a great pleasure to have here Drs. Inge Brotherton, Alan Stroud, and Klaus Grossman. All have contributed so much to issues which have universal implications in a lifespan context. I thank Klaus Grossman, who has agreed to join us after we were informed by Marinus van Eijendorn that he will not be able to be here today due to illness. I wish him all the very best for a fast recovery. I would like to read a brief statement that Marinus has made. My contribution to this conversation hour should be considered to honor Mary Ainsworth's brilliant work on attachment. Time and again her pioneering work with a strange situation proves to be central in the metaphorical and in the literal sense. Especially my meta-analytic works shows this characteristic very clearly. My questions are focused on explanations and interpretations of some meta-analytic findings that seem to corroborate attachment theory so nicely. With this in mind, I would like to start with the first question raised by Marinus.
There are 5 chairs in the front. If 5 people wish to come up and find them. Here's one. I counted that one. Here's one over here. You sit over here, you might need to ask a question.
Okay, the first question, Mary, by Marinus van Eijendorn. In a meta-analysis on cross-cultural patterns of attachment, as well as in a meta-analysis on attachment in clinical groups, your original studies appear to show a distribution that comes very close to the distribution based on all cross-cultural and on all Northern American samples. Your samples appear to be normative even after more than 15 years of attachment research. How would you explain this fact?
It's quite serendipitous. That's almost all I have to say.
Next question.
I could say that the core of the sample to which Marinus refers as being very close to the average of all was the strange situation classification grew out of a very intensive, frequent kind of visiting program we had throughout the first year of infants. And I do feel that what we're trying to sample in the strange situation is what is true of the child in other situations as well, especially in the home. And that's what it's predicting in a sense. Therefore, dare I say that I came closer to the truth, or closest to the truth an explanation of this serendipitous finding. But you can take that with a grain of salt.
Okay, thank you. History plays an important role in many aspects of our life, and I guess attachment is no exception in this regard. And I would like Inge to lead a small discussion around these issues.
Can you hear me if I shout? All right, I'll just speak loudly. All right. Many researchers believe that your use of naturalistic observations was entirely inspired by ethology. Are they right?
Not all. When I first visited, or I shouldn't say visited, went to London and had the great fortune to get a job on John Bowlby's research team, I was enormously impressed with the work being done by Jimmy Robertson, who was using, and he didn't even think this was scientific, he was using direct observational methods, recorded in a running account of the behavior of children with their parents before they were separated wherever possible, their responses during the separation, including their responses to the visits of the parents over time, and the responses not only at the time of reunion with their parents, but for a period after reunion. Now, this wasn't possible with all his cases, but I felt that the yield of this was enormously rich, and I determined that when I left what I was doing at that point, working on the Bowlby team, I was only hired for 2 years, turned out to be 3, that wherever I went, my first research study was going to be a longitudinal study, short-term longitudinal study of infants during the first year of life, using the kind of methods that Jimmy had used. Also, the reason I was interested in the first year of life was after separation studies and studies of maternally deprived children. If what goes on between an infant and its mother is so important that it doesn't happen if the infant doesn't have a mother figure, and if having established a bond with the mother, a traumatic, serious, major separation has so much adverse effect, what on earth does go on between a mother and her baby during the first year of life? And then Bowlby got interested in ethology. He'd always thought, however, that nothing was more important than real life experiences, and that's what we should be concerned with, not fantasies. At least not primarily fantasies, surely. And then when he discovered ethology, this seemed to fit in not only perfectly with his convictions of the importance of direct field observations, but it also fit in very, very well with his own clinical convictions about the importance of real life experiences. And it was a combination of these two that really turned it around for me. And when I went to Uganda, which was my first opportunity to do the study I was talking about, that's what I did.
Could I ask a little follow-up question? Possibly talk a little bit about your observations in Uganda and how you did them.
Well, in Uganda, first the big thing was to locate a sample, which I had to go through a whole hierarchy of chiefs to do, and then have a whole series of explain it to the chiefs, have a town meeting, explain it to the people at the town meeting, and then those that wanted to follow it up, I would visit their homes and explain it all over again. So just getting the sample set up was a major operation. What I did was to visit each home for about 2 hours every 2 weeks. At the request of the mothers, I visited in the afternoon when they'd got their gardening work done. And this was the time for social occasions, and that I was limited by that. So I didn't see every phase of their life. I was accompanied by an interpreter, and although I had been studying Uganda in my academic way with exercises and exams and grammars and dictionaries, I did manage to learn enough to be polite, and that's about the size of it. And my interpreter did ask the questions that I wanted to ask, and in the meantime, I observed what everybody was doing. I made little notes, and then I would get the questions answered by the interpreter, and it was a combination of direct observation with notes and questions of the mother about her infant care practices and what she had to say about the development of the child as it went along. These were prepared in written accounts, very much like the ones that Jimmy Robertson wrote about his visits, and subsequently, of course, had to be subject to data reduction. And I don't want to go into that at this point. Enough?
Okay, my second question, a little more general. Often John Bowlby is regarded as the creator of attachment theory, while you are seen as the person who translated theory into research. However, I believe that you have made a number of very significant contributions to the theory in your own right. I'd like you to comment about those.
Well, for a long time, I think I agreed with the people that thought of Bowlby as the theoretician and I was just the researcher. But over time, I began to realize that I indeed, anyhow, I began to realize that I indeed had contributed to the theory. I think it was mostly Bowlby's response that led me to realize that this indeed was so. And I think probably the thing that I contributed most moment was the secure base, the concept of the secure base. And that I brought with me to London from my experience as a graduate student or even an undergraduate at the University of Toronto, where my mentor there was William Blotz, who had something he called security theory. Now, it differs from attachment theory in many, many ways. But the thing that I picked up, I think, as something that seemed most significant to me was the notion of a secure base. That, as Blotz put it, a child finds exploration potentially hazardous and frightening, and thus makes him insecure. And therefore he doesn't willingly explore out to understand the world any better unless he has a parent to whom he can return, get reassurance, and comfort. Well, that is the essence of the secure base phenomenon. And this also in the course of my work with on my dissertation. It was quite clear that security, insecurity covers a wide range, and that one can have different qualities, if you like, of or degrees of security and security, mixed up with some other variables that give qualitative nature. So, in a sense, I came up with patterns of security in my dissertation work that immediately, even during the Uganda study, it translated itself to patterns of attachment. So I think those are the two major things that I contributed. But also, Bowlby and I worked pretty closely together over a large span of time and quite a considerable geographical distance. And he sent me all his writings in draft to comment on, and I absorbed them and commented on them. And I did likewise. So there was a lot of exchange back and forth. And we absorbed each other's thinking. It was often very interesting to me that when Bowlby wrote something new, what a delight it was to find I had been thinking along the same lines and more or less arriving at the same place. Not in everything, but in enough instances to make me feel very comfortable. One of the things that, in explaining attachment theory to other people, that I found myself a little baffled by was following Lorentz. Bowlby's initial statement of behavioral systems was that they got turned on and they got turned off. And this didn't seem to make an awful lot of sense about attachment, because the attachment system being a constantly monitoring system of accessibility to the attachment figure or figures never goes to sleep in a sense. It's always active to some extent. And so I found myself thinking in terms of level of intensity of activation of the theory, of the system. And this made a lot of sense in terms of conflict, that in resolving a conflict situation, it's the system that has the higher activation of two that dominates behavior. And when they're almost equally activated, then you get more conflict behaviors and so on. Nothing flattered me more than the first time I received a new copy of one of Bowlby's books, and he always wrote in his green ink and unmistakable hand a little acknowledgement. And the first time that he said, referred to our long and rich partnership. That pleased me more than anything else he could possibly have said. And that's what I think we wear in partners.
Thank you, Mary. Now I guess we've got some historical perspective, which I believe is on par with other things that you can tell us. I'd like to move to the future and ask Ellen to lead a discussion about life span perspective.
I don't need that. I'll talk very loud. I always do anyway. This is a wonderful opportunity, and the questions that I'm going to ask are a little self-serving because they're questions I'd like to know the answers to in terms of conducting my own work. The first one has to do, it's both a conceptual and methodological question having to do with how we conceive attachment at different ages and the implications for assessment. Is the attachment relationship fundamentally different at different developmental periods? In particular, are there features of infant caregiver attachments that are unique? And are there unique features at other childhood periods? If so, what would be the implications for assessment?
Well, I do think that there are fundamental similarities of attachments at various ages. Maintaining a degree of proximity to attachment figures, I think, is one that goes the whole way through from infancy into old age. I think that the secure base phenomenon is something that is focal to the concept of attachment relationships at all ages. Not necessarily having found a secure base, but the need for a secure base, and the search for one if, in fact, one's attachment figures don't really yield it often enough. I think defensive maneuvers of one kind or another are characteristic of attachment relationships at all ages. I don't mean that all infants or all adults are equally defensive, but that this is a concept that is important. And the failure to have acquired or achieved a secure base or a secure, an attachment figure that yields security, I think, leads to a variety of outcomes that are not all that dissimilar at core across the lifespan. In infancy, perhaps the most important focus on development is becoming attached. Becoming attached to one or a few caregiving figures. That is, if you like, what the unique aspect of attachment is in infancy, that it is this period where it is really the main job of the infant. In the 3 or 4 year age period, the focus shifts to, in attachment theory at any rate, to the goal-corrected partnership. The establishment of, or the recasting the attachment relationship that's already been established to include perspective taking, improved communication, and negotiation of mutual plans, and a variety of other things closely related to these. And did you ask me?
If it's a good question, yes.
No, you didn't ask me about, yes, the implications for assessment. And I think that these must be taken account of in devising methods of assessment of attachment at other ages. It just so happens that the strange situation got right at the core, I think, of what we mean by attachment. But I don't think that all the other assessment techniques that have been attempted for other ages do get at the things that make the preschool age, for example, sort of the unique thing of establishing this communication, being able to see things from the partner's point of view, and this making a difference in achieving mutual understanding and mutual mutually acceptable plans. If we get around to devising an assessment of attachment in adolescence, I'm sure one has to take into account some hormones and their effects. And I don't think anyone has really tackled that yet. I think it's always important to view attachment in the context of other features of development. And I don't think we bothered enough about the other features of phases of development in devising attachment. I, at the moment, am concerned about aging with its loss of physical strength and capacities, including being able to remember easily, especially names, difficulties with health that limit autonomy. And I'm finding attachment figures are more important to me than they've been for a long, long time. And this is another example of what I mean. Some people have suggested that there is a phase in which autonomy is especially important. And I think the interaction of attachment and autonomy go the whole way through life, the balance between the two. And that's essentially what is involved in the secure base. So I don't think of there being any phase in which autonomy is all important or of no importance. That I think that's about as far as I foster.
I get to ask one more at this point, is that right? This is one that's important to ask because attachment theory is often interpreted as implying a kind of critical period and early scarring. The question has to do with continuity and change. How do you conceive of continuity and change, especially in individuals with early anxious attachments? Can change happen? Can change be complete? And finally, what happens to earlier experiences following change?
Well, for some reason or other, my first thoughts about change, especially of anxious attachment change, the category that Mary Main discovered or featured, that may be new to some of you at any rate, is the category of the disorganized, disoriented infant. Now, it's quite clear from the follow-ups that she has done of children that can be so classified in infancy, that by age 6 they clearly have changed. She keeps calling them Ds because that's the way they started off. But they've changed so they're no longer disorganized. Nearly all of them have now achieved some sort of organization, although it is quite different than the organization that A, B, and C infants have. And I won't go into that. Well, one category is controlling, and there are various variations in that in terms of punitive controlling or caregiving as a controlling pattern. And sort of compulsive caregiving, if you like. My friend Pat Crittenden here in the front row has also discovered among children that most clearly were very upset and disorganized, insecure as babies, that they may be compulsively compliant as preschoolers. And she also suggests that children that might be classified according to the main standards, as disorganized in infancy, may, as preschoolers, have alternative strategies to suit different situations in which the attachment figure is being interacted with. Infant disorganization also can disappear. I'm quite convinced it can be a temporary thing. For example, there can be disorganization in infancy after a rather traumatic separation that by a later age clearly can disappear altogether, the effects of this, depending on how the mother has responded to the child's disorganization at the time. That some avoidant insecure babies can become anxiously resistant, I think has been demonstrated. And the reverse of anxiously avoidant babies, anxiously resistant babies becoming avoidant sometime later. I think that these things can be understood. A's can become C's if their defenses break down. And we did a study in which the strain situation was given 2 weeks apart at age 50 and 52 weeks. And all our A's were classified as B's. It wasn't that they weren't avoidant anymore. It was that in the course of the strain situation, their avoidance was overshadowed by proximity seeking and content seeking, and therefore perhaps they were misclassified, but nevertheless they certainly seemed to cease to be avoidant. I think that a B infant can become an A child if something breaks down between him and his mother in terms of the child receiving the contact that he wants, in terms of its closeness and its timing. And this, I'm quite sure, is behind the first construction of an avoidant defense. And it can come later. In short, I think that certain experiences predictably can lead to changes in pattern of attachment. And most of this, I think, can and should focus on changes in the mother's behavior that change the nature of her interaction with the child sufficiently to make the difference. But I'm also quite sure that as we go on through the lifespan, that there are certain catastrophic things that can happen that people never really get over. They may partially overcome them, but perhaps never entirely regain the security they may have had before. And likewise, I'd like to believe that something similar can happen in terms of an enormous improvement in the way one looks at the world. And I think I'll reserve that one for later discussion.
Would you like to say questions about the lifespan?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mary. I was actually originally wanting to ask you what you would have done if you had had an opportunity to go back to your Baltimore sample, what you have looked for, but I'm trying to phrase it a bit more general. There has been quite some discussion, actually over the past, as I see it, over the past 15 or 20 years, whether the infants classified as A, avoidant, or C, ambivalently attached, anxiously attached, whether this should be considered or was to be considered by the attachment researchers as the origins of a pathological development. Or on the other hand, there were people who said, well, this is just another form of adaptation, maybe a cultural relative form, which was the response to our Bielefeld, namely avoidant children. Now, with the exception of Ellen, many of us are doing research where these children are actually functioning pretty normal within their everyday environment. So we always need a certain probe in order to tease out the differences between the A's and B's, and without these probes, they become less apparent and sometimes not apparent at all. But on the other hand, you have stated that B is the preferable class, and I would like you to comment on these differences.
I think that the main difficulty an avoidant child has to carry with him or her is finding it very difficult to establish and to maintain closeness with other people, and to communicate their feelings and establish a goal-corrected kind of exchange of meaningful information. And now, I think this is a handicap. And I think that, of course, some people have more difficulty than others. But I quite agree that there are people that I think of as having started off as with an avoidant defense that are certainly competent people who make their way through life pretty successfully. They get married, they have children, and don't seem to be limited by this very much. Maybe their wives feel that they'd like to be closer, maybe their kids feel that they like freer communication, but, you know, on the whole, they look like pretty contributing citizens. However, I think also these people are very vulnerable to a major loss or a very major disappointment. And Bowlby has covered this, I think, in volume 3. What does he call it? It's a phony kind of independence these people have, that they don't want to be helped, or at least they say they don't want to be helped. They pride themselves on being independent and not beholden to anybody, not dependent on anybody, and then some major loss comes along or major disappointment, and they crack. Underlying this seems to be the capacity for quite serious depression. So I think there's always a flaw in someone that maintains this kind of defense that started off as avoidance of closeness in infancy. However, I think one of the nicest things that is implicit in Mary Ainsworth's work with the adult attachment interview is her discovery that a very significant minority of those that are classified as secure as adults have had experiences as children that would certainly have made them classifiable as insecure in childhood. And somehow or other they have digested these experiences and come to term with them and seem to be quite secure in their views associated with attachment relationships in general. And these are the children that happily, Mary found, even though they themselves were insecure undoubtedly as infants, are able to provide the kind of sensitive responsiveness to their own infants that they turn out to be secure. And how these changes take place, we don't know nearly enough about. I like to think some of them might take place through good therapy. It's also possible that as an individual reaches adulthood, that they're capable of metacognition that makes it possible for them to rework their internal models and come to terms with them that way, even without help. And also, I'm sure that there are a good number of them that make this big shift is through having had, even in childhood, another attachment figure other than the parent that really gave the secure base, whether it be a relative or teacher or whatever, or more likely, eventually, they were fortunate in marrying a spouse that could communicate with them in a way that they previously found it very difficult to communicate.
Thank you.
I'd like Mary to raise another question of Magnus van Eigendorn. In a meta-analysis of 34 studies on clinical groups ranging from deaf children to depressed mothers, Van Eigendorn and his co-workers found that only in case of maternal problems, but not child problems, the strain situation classification distributions differ markedly from normal samples. Only maternal problems, such as depression, appear to lead to an overrepresentation of anxious attachments, but not child problems, such as physical impairments. How would you explain this outcome?
Well, I do think that any maternal problem that affects the mother in her ability to be sensitively responsive to her child's signals and communications is likely to make for anxiety. On the other hand, I think a mother who is really good at sensing what her child is communicating and responding appropriately to it, depending on the degree of disability and the degree of her dedication, I think that an enormous number of really serious problems can be overcome in infancy that otherwise would clearly have made for insecurity. And I think the first case that really convinced me of this was one reported by Louis Sander in a longitudinal study not unlike mine that didn't really get published because they didn't publish piecemeal the way I did. This was a child who was born brain damaged. The mother was considered at high risk as a mother because of her own very horrible experiences in childhood. But apparently the mother decided that she was going to do it entirely different than her parents had done it, that her child was really going to get good mothering. And so she wasn't put off by this baby's rigidity in being held, by his inability to absorb 1 ounce or so of food at a time, his constant crying because he was almost constantly hungry within a short period after feeding and so on. She had a lot to cope with, and she nevertheless was very devoted and responsive. And by the during the first year, this child was clearly retarded in development. This became less and less so until in a follow-up at age 6. It was perhaps one of the most normal children in the sample in terms of IQ, schoolwork, and in terms of also good relationships with parents. And that's a pretty convincing tale. Then I'm thinking also of studies that are being done now by my colleague Bob Marvin and his team, who have been studying research, who have been researching quality of attachment in children with cerebral palsy. And you might expect these cerebral palsy children more of them to be insecure than you find in an unimpaired sample. This is not so. They are just as secure, at least as many of them are secure as their normal counterparts. And again, it seems to be very much the rest on the kind of interaction the mother has and with the child and her ability to meet his needs and needs and desires. Relating to attachment. Don't give a baby absolutely everything he wants as a matter of a sense of responsiveness, but give him what he needs and wants relating to attachment. So Marina's isn't going to answer that. Yeah, I think this business of depression, I think depressed mothers do tend to be very unusually unresponsive. And that's the reason that this is struggling particularly.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that comment, please? That depressed mothers?
Could I repeat that? I'm sorry. Marina noticed that there was a particular problem with depression, that if mothers were depressed, the children were very apt to be insecure. Well, I think depression is certainly a state in which one tends to be unresponsive, rather more than almost anything else I can think of. So it's no surprise that children of depressed parents tend to be insecure.
I would like to raise a final question, which has to do with potential trends for the future. Assume, Mary, that you are going to be the mentor of a new junior faculty in your department. She just got her PhD here in Minneapolis under the supervision of Ellen Sroufe. Thus, she can do well, very well, in a wide range of issues around attachment research. Also, she has just completed a postdoc fellowship with Mary Main, so she has been she has been further introduced to issues of adult attachment. In sum, she is a well-trained young scientist having a solid knowledge and skills in the field. What kind of new direction would you like her to take? What kind of work would give you a great deal of satisfaction?
Well, as long as no one interprets this as me crying out to be a mentor of even a person of that caliber at this stage of my life, I would say that under such hypothetical circumstances, I would certainly emphasize the importance of continuing to explore the field of attachment beyond infancy through various phases of the lifespan, and to do this not only through extrapolations from the strange situation, which is the way a lot of this has gone, but to try to find what are the unique things that affect attachment relationships, and I referred to this a little earlier, the unique changes, developmental changes that have taken place leading up to the particular period that you are intending to devote yourself to, and build up understanding of the processes that are going on at the time, and then maybe to try to devise an assessment that is appropriate to that particular age range. And this opens the field to, about 50 such students. That might begin at any point. And maybe old age, as I was saying, is a good time to start.
Thank you. So with this happy note, we have to finish our conversation. Our time is over. Thank you all participants and audience.
People